I hate to admit it, but I was wrong. I thought AGI was a pipe dream and that AIs would never be as smart as a human, but AI has actually been doing the most human thing possible for the last year, and that is cheating on every single one of their tests. Jokes aside, I definitely don't think AGI is here or coming anytime soon, but AI has been proven to be cheating on all of these different benchmark scores that you've seen to the point where they're practically completely useless. This is a study from a year ago that talks about essentially how they went about testing if the AI actually understands what they're doing or if they're just cheating on all these different benchmark tests. And what they did is they essentially gave the AI a certain repository, so a link to a GitHub repository, a description of an issue, and essentially said, hey, fix this issue and put your fix directly into here with all the code properly formatted exactly like it's supposed to be to fix this particular issue. And if we scroll down, this is the actual chart they got for running this test, and they ran it across various different benchmarks. So you can see the scores, all these different colors are different AI models. So blue is Anthropic, we have green here, which is the GPT models, and then OpenAI models are these red ones. And right now on the far left, you get the SWE bench verified. This is like the most standard benchmark for software engineering. You can see the scores here are quite high because this is what everyone's testing against. And as we work across over here to the right, we're essentially going with more and more non-stream testing. So you can see here we have the full SWE benchmark, which is relatively similar. Then we get some extra things that aren't in the normal benchmark, and you can see the scores drop drastically. We have a section that is just tasks that are outside of the repository. So these are things that are just taking outside GitHub repositories with similarly structured issues and things like that, and trying to pipe those in to see how it does. And then we have some other benchmarks here, and you can see the scores drastically decrease to the point where you're essentially below 50% of your normal performance over here on the right-hand side versus what you're actually getting on these benchmarks. And that's a clear indicator that the AI is essentially just memorizing the answers to the test and then writing them down instead of actually learning how to think through and solve these particular problems. This was actually tested even further inside this exact same paper. We have the exact same graph over here on different benchmark related scores. And then on the bottom, this is essentially testing how much the AI is memorizing the answer as opposed to actually deriving and creating the answer on the fly. So this is testing the 5-gram overlap. And essentially all that's telling us is how similar is the answer the AI gives us to the exact answer that is in the answer key for this test. And since the way that this code is structured and these answers are structured, if you remember, all we did is give them a link to a repository and a description of the issue. And if the code they produce is identical to the code of the answer key, that means that they're just copying the answer key instead of deriving their own implementation for solving this particular issue. And this is very apparent if you look at the graph down here below. You can see on the left-hand side, this is that bench verified test, the one that everyone is testing against. And the similarity of the different answers you can see is as high as 35%, which means that most of the answers are essentially almost identical to the answers in the answer key that they're testing against. And if we go over here to the far right, where these things are not being normally tested against, you can see this percentage of similarity is much lower, much more commonly what you would see with something that's trying to create an answer but doesn't know what the answer is, so it's having to derive that answer on its own. So you can see on the left-hand side here, these scores are essentially twice as high as these answers over on the left-hand side here, sometimes even 3 times as high, which means the AI, instead of actually learning how to implement things and do things properly, is instead learning how to copy the answers specifically for the benchmarks and is essentially training itself for those benchmarks. So it's memorizing answers to these benchmark questions and it's able to regurgitate them properly to score higher on these benchmarks. Now, I'm not saying that this is intentionally done by anyone training these AIs, but it is something to take into account. And when the AI is trained against specific benchmarks, it's very easy to essentially do overfitting where the AI is specifically training to solve just these problems. And instead of learning how to problem solve for general applications, it's just learning how do I see the pattern of this particular question and give the exact right answer every single time. And this isn't the only paper that talks about these particular issues. There are tons of papers, articles, blogs, things more formal and less formal that all analyze the exact same thing and say, hey, all these different AI models that are scoring incredibly highly on these benchmarks, a lot of that high scoring is not necessarily them getting better at inferring and understanding how things work. Maybe part of it is that, but also a large part of it is they've just learned to memorize the exact answers to the test. It's kind of the same thing as if your teacher gives you a practice test and it's the exact same as the real test, and you just memorize what the answers are on the practice test 5 minutes before you take the test, and you hurriedly write them down all on the test because you have them in your short-term memory. That's essentially what the AI is doing. It's using a practice test that is identical to the real test, and when it comes to take the real test, it doesn't need to know how to actually solve the problem. It just needs to memorize which bubble to fill in on the Scantron sheet to give the correct answer. So next time you see some massive benchmark number that says that AI is going to replace all programmers, just realize that these benchmarks are most likely super inflated due to this memorization, And AI companies are highly incentivized to run their program over and over on the benchmark until they get the best number, and that's the one they're giving you. So not only is it overinflated for memorization, but they're giving you the best possible outcome out of all the times they ran the benchmark. So I guess we're just going to have to wait a little longer for AGI, and if it ever does happen, at least I'll be justified in knowing that AI also cheats.